Hi everyone, this is Daniel from the UCLA History Geography Project. This is the second of our two-part series on how to use the IREAD strategy with your students. This video will focus on EAD, which is the analysis portion of IREAD. EAD should be introduced to your students after they've had some time practicing the comprehension portion of IREAD, which is I and R. The E in IREAD asks students to examine the author's reliability. Students consider questions such as who wrote the document, why they wrote it, what the occasion was, and who the intended audience was. Students will draw stars next to this information. These questions will help students make some judgments about the author's reliability. The A asks students to assess the influence of context. Students do this by drawing an arrow by the date and any references in the text to past events. Students are to see this information as a set of clues that can help them better understand the claims being made. Finally, D asks students to determine the quality of the author's facts and examples. Students will do this by drawing boxes around the facts and examples used by the author throughout the text. For E, A, and D, students will make judgments. In order to do this, ask students to write the word judgments at the bottom of their document. Then ask them to write EAD. Let's revisit our source. If you've watched our last video, then you know that we have already read this document and have determined the author's response to the inquiry question. Was the annexation of the Philippines Islands justified? Clearly, the author says yes. Let's now examine the reliability of the author. First, let's source the document. Who wrote this document? We're going to go ahead and write a star next to the author. Now, this is interesting because it's an interview, so although these are William McKinley's words, it was written by General James Russell. And we also should put a star next to McKinley's name since he is the one being interviewed. So this brings up an interesting discussion point about the author and his reliability, and we'll discuss that in a bit. But first, let's continue to examine the author. Who was the intended audience? It seems like it was readers of the Christian Advocate. So we have to assume that the people that read this newspaper were Christians and were people who believed in some sort of cause. So we're going to go ahead and put a star next to the Christian Advocate. So now, according to IREAD, I need to make some judgments about the author's reliability. This is a key critical thinking piece which will really help your students when they write an essay on this particular topic. For E, I want my students to come up with one reason they doubt the author's reliability and one reason why they find him to be reliable. So again, back to the bottom. We are now on E, and for reliable, I'm going to put a plus sign. Not reliable, we'll put a negative sign. So, Rusling is not entirely reliable because he's writing for a newspaper with a title that lends me to believe that there is a clear bias. So I'm going to write that the bias of the newspaper may influence what he wrote. Excuse me. Now this is important because a lot of historians question the accuracy of this particular document, in particular because it doesn't seem consistent with what President McKinley has said about annexation or religion in prior speeches. I also want to determine why Rusling may be reliable. To me, Rusling is reliable because he did this interview. So I'm going to write that. He did the interview. Meaning these are the president's words. I'm going to have to abbreviate. Now we turn our attention to contextualizing this document. Now we're going to do this by reviewing the document and putting arrows next to the dates, as well as locations or references to events. So to begin with, we look at the source, and we see that this document was written or published on January 22nd, 1903. We draw an arrow there. Again, the arrows are to serve as clues to help students better understand why this document was written. So as we go through this document, we'll find that in the first paragraph, he references the Spanish-American War. This is an event. This will help us contextualize this document. And we know that that was in 1898. Some other events referenced in this paragraph: the destruction of the Spanish fleet, and he also says that one night it came to him. In the second paragraph, another event is referenced, and you see it down here where he says the Filipinos, would soon have anarchy and misrule over there, worse than Spain's was. So he's referring to an event. Gives us a clue about what his opinion was of the Spanish colonization and control of the Philippine Islands. Okay, now I want to judge the influence of context on this document and how it supports the author's claim and how it may not necessarily support his claim. When I consider what was going on in the U.S. during this time, the author's claim makes sense because the U.S. was in the midst of a debate around what should be done with the Spanish colonies after the Spanish-American War. So, I'm going to go ahead and write that next to my positive sign. The Spanish-American War, again I'm going to abbreviate, ended in 1898, the same year it started, and a debate began over annexation. Now, IREAD recommends that students create a brief timeline on their document to contextualize what they're reading. This is a good idea, but it may be a bit challenging for some of your students. Another option is for the teacher to provide this background information. They can do this by maybe projecting a basic timeline of events so that students can reference it during their analysis of the document. So one reason that this doesn't entirely make sense is the conflict in the Philippines I'm going to abbreviate that, ended in 1902. So the United States went forward, attempted to annex the Philippine Islands, which resulted in a war against the Filipinos that ended in 1902. So we got to ask ourselves, this interview was done in 1903. A few months after that war ended, was the interview done in 1903, or was it just published in 1903 to perhaps justify what the United States attempted to do in the Philippine Islands? Now, we revisit our document and determine the quality of the facts used by the author. The way we do this is by drawing boxes around any facts or examples that he uses as he makes his claim. So, the first thing that I noticed when I read this document is that initially, all the president wanted was for the Spanish fleet at Manila to be destroyed, and that was done. But as a result, the Philippines, according to the author, fell into the lap of the president. So we'll box that. In the second paragraph, we will find the majority of the facts and examples used by the president in his explanation as to why he went forward and attempted to annex the Philippine Islands. One of the first things that he said is that we couldn't give them back to the Spanish because, according to him, that would be cowardly and dishonorable. He also says that he couldn't turn them over to France and Germany because they were our commercial rivals in the Orient. That would be bad for business, and it would really do a disservice to our reputation. It would be discreditable. Third, he claims that the Filipinos were unfit for government and that they would soon have anarchy and misrule over there, worse than Spain's. So now we turn our attention to our final judgment, and that's for D, our determination of the facts and examples used by the author. McKinley's claim about not handing the Philippine Islands over to our commercial rivals is convincing because the U.S. was in the middle of a global competition during this time. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. So the commercial rivals claim, and I'll just say because the existing global competition. Again, I'm going to have to abbreviate because I'm using a stylus. So I'll just leave it like that. Now, one reason to judge the facts and opinions as not being quite believable is that most of these facts and opinions are just that. They're opinions, they're personal beliefs, and they're based on cultural superiority. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. Most of what McKinley says are opinions, his personal religious beliefs, and cultural superiority. Excuse my spelling, or my writing, I should say. So now we've completed our analysis of this document. This process should be scaffolded for your students because, as you see, doing all the steps of IREAD at once will be overwhelming and may cause your students some confusion. Thanks for watching this YouTube video. There are links in the description to the UCLA History Geography Project IREAD, which includes directions on how to annotate visuals, such as political cartoons and photographs. For more information, you can visit us at our website. You can also follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. Thanks for watching.